I've said in the past that I don't want to live in a comic book world where Vita Ayala is considered like a role model or like the ideal person to look up to for success in the industry. And unfortunately, I am living in that comic book world. Vita Ayala is somebody to look up to. You don't need to be successful in this comic book industry if you're Vita Ayala. You can continuously get work at Marvel, DC, and every independent publisher out there if you're Vita Ayala, and you don't ever actually have to sell a comic book. A great example of this is Danny Lore, essentially her protege. If Vita Ayala ends up at a publisher, Danny Lore will be at that publisher in a very short time, and that is coming true when it comes to Marvel Comics and their X-Men universe. In fact, she's writing a New Mutants story, replacing Vita Ayala for one issue. Now, we know the grift. This is the way it works. Vita Ayala, Tini Howard, and Leah Williams, they get you in on one issue or like a fill-in or something. They get you into the X-Men Slack, and then Jordan White has to give you a job afterwards. So it's guaranteed that Danny Lore will be writing an ongoing or a miniseries or something in the very near future following her writing New Mutants number 29. There was an interview with Adventures of War Taste. This is the best thing that happens to me every single Monday. I get so much material, and you're going to have heard some of these things before. This is the first thing Adventures in Poor Taste asked Danny Lore. So you're writing New Mutants number 29. How did this opportunity to fill in for an issue come about? This is what Danny Lore had to say. I was super lucky to have Sarah Brunstad, the New Mutants editor, approach me for an issue. I was already a big fan of the members of the team, and even more so a fan of this pretty gnarly writer named Vita Ayala, whose run had already made me cry a couple times. Seriously, though, I consulted with Vita, Sarah, and Jordan D. White quite a bit while committing to a specific story. I'm a fan of the X-Office, but I didn't want to take an issue and then make everyone else's life harder because I didn't have the same command of the canon. As it turns out, I wasn't as lost in the wild hunt as I thought I was. Of course you weren't. You were literally working in an office full of imbeciles, coming in with no idea about X-Men history or canon doesn't really put you behind the 8 ball in the current X-Men office. And not shockingly, Sarah Brunstad's name comes up once again, going out there and cold pitching the writer who apparently had no interest whatsoever in writing a New Mutant story, despite all of her friends working in the X-Men office, including her closest friend and mentor, Vita Ayala. Writing X-Men comics for Marvel these days is probably the best gig in all of comic books. You don't have to be successful. You don't have to like X-Men. You don't have to know the history or anything. You just have to be there. You don't have to be talented. You don't have to be a good writer. You don't have to have a history of sales. You don't even have to write a good comic book story in the X-Men. As long as you're friends with the people in the X-Men office, Vita Ayala is an absolute big-time bonus. If you're friends with Vita, you definitely get a job. It's the best gig going today. It's basically a scam right now. They're bilking Marvel Comics, Disney, Marvel, all of these people out of money because they're just paying them to sit there and hang out all day and write really bad stories. And it doesn't matter if they're good or not. The next question from AIPT, you mentioned regular New Mutants writer Vita Ayala. Do you and Vita bounce any ideas around when developing your story? This is what Danny Lore had to say, and you're going to be surprised. Not, is it a day that ends in Y? If I'm not bouncing ideas around with Vita, for this one, I constantly checked in. Even if Vita was just giving me the thumbs up, I didn't want to have to go back to the drawing board because of some upcoming developments that I had missed. Plus, I don't believe in ignoring a resource, and Vita's immersion in New Mutants and overall creative brilliance is a great one. For somebody in modern comics to have the output quantity of Vita Ayala and really only have maybe 2 or 3 issues here and there that are actually worth reading, based on the quantity, which has to be in the hundreds of comic books at this point, I just don't feel like Vita Ayala should be something to aspire to. And that's me talking as like a comic book critic and as a comic book fan. Like, why would you want to be Vita Ayala? But as a comic book professional, if you're Danny Lore, why wouldn't you want to be Vita Ayala? She's literally not written anything that's sold in the X-Men office, yet she hasn't been fired. And beyond that, she has the clout to go out there and recruit and bring in all of her friends to write within the X-Men office as well. And the really bad thing about this is it's clear that Vita Ayala doesn't know much about X-Men or X-Men comics or X-Men history. So you're setting a standard or precedent for these new writers coming in that look up to Vita Ayala that you can go write anything. You don't have to be good. You don't have to know the material or anything. You just go in there, you do whatever story you want to, and because you can essentially be as bad as you want to be, you can manage yourself, and there's never going to be an expectation of actual success within the comic book industry. That is the standard that has been set within comic books. That is why you're having an infiltration of untalented people that don't really like comic books and characters. They certainly hate the fans into this industry, because you can be as bad as Vita Ayala, and Vita Ayala is considered a success today. That is who Danny Lore wants to be, and it kind of feels like she's already there at this point. The X-Men office is literally the blind leading the blind. I wonder why we're getting some of the worst stories in the history of X-Men. The X-Men have been around for 60 years. Chris Claremont's X-Men run is the greatest run in comic book history, and I guarantee you 90% of the people in the X-Men office haven't read 2 issues of it, and it just shows. The next question from Adventures in Poor Taste that embarrasses Danny Lore. X fans want to know what your favorite New Mutant story is. This is Danny Lore's answer. Okay, Chance, you can't say I'm cheating if I say the current run of New Mutants, particularly the first Vita and Rod arc. What Rod does art-wise is absolutely captivating and slithers under your skin, a perfect compliment to Vita's writing. However, if I must pick another series, that 2003-2004 series is another favorite. Over half the answers in this interview with Danny Lore about her work on New Mutants is about Vita Ayala. It's absolutely astounding. Vita Ayala has the New Mutants run that you would want to talk about being your favorite ever. Like, this is like, that is a bad answer. At least she talked about the Nunzio De Philippis Christina Weir run, which I guess if you're going to write Danny Moonstar, like, that's something that would have been required reading. But she's missing out like all the best New Mutants writers. No Chris Claremont, no Zeb Wells, no Louise Simonson, none of the writers that are like associated with the great New Mutants runs ever. You know, at least she mentioned the 2003-2004 run. But if you're not into the Chris Claremont New Mutants, if you're not getting into the Bill Sienkiewicz, you know, Louise Simonson New Mutants, like, what are you here for? What are you actually trying to build upon? The foundation that Vita Ayala broke? Like, I don't get the point of even saying you're a fan at this point. They're just fans of each other. They don't like comic books. I'm 95% confident they're actually in this business, in comic book industry, because the expectations and the barrier for entry is so low that you can go into comics and you can squat for like 10 years, have a career, do nothing of substance, and still get paid the entire time. I think they're just here because they can be, and no one else will hire them. They're not comic fans. They don't like X-Men, yet Jordan White, Sarah Brunstad, and the brain trust behind X-Men keep hiring these hack writers. This lady literally wants to be the next Vita Ayala, and you're infecting your brand with that, and people are welcoming that. It's absolute insanity. The final question, someone asked, beyond New Mutants 29, can we expect any more X-Men stories from you in the future? This is what Danny Lore said. I would love to do more, and it would likely depend on whether or not people dig this writing cameo, with a winky face, of course. You and I both know that Danny Lore will be writing X-Men for the next 2 years minimum, and it has no bearing what you and I thought about the comic book. It doesn't matter if any X-Men fans actually enjoy this comic book. There's no stopping Danny Lore or any of the other untalented hacks within the X-Men office from getting more X-Men writing gigs. And that's just the way it is. This is the state of X-Men comics today. We've been talking about it for a very long time. Every time they bring a new writer in to write on X-Men, AIPT does an interview with them. First thing they ask, how did you get the gig? Every single one of them. I never actually talked to anybody. They came to me and they asked me what X-Men story I wanted to write, despite being an untalented hack. That is like, it's so frustrating to be a Marvel fan, an X-Men fan, and there's so much evidence out there that Vita Ayala is a talentless hack that drives sales away. Look at what's happening to Wonder Woman, specifically Nubia. They want Nubia to be an important character. Unfortunately, they've associated the character with Vita Ayala herself. And when you see what Vita Ayala has done with Nubia, you can see why everyone ran away. You've got to see this if you want a great example of what a terrible, absolute fraud of a writer Vita Ayala is. She turned Nubia into like a stupid, toxic pickup artist in the series. You got to check this out. If you're on mobile device, there's a link in the video description.